Comedy anime tend to fall on either end of a spectrum. Hyperkinetic gag-a-minute type deals where the jokes come from just how absurd the situation is, or ultra-mundane affairs focusing more on pleasantness and the characters just being. There are of course many shows that break out of this mold or function on a combination of the two. Tonari no Seki-kun, or as the anime is known, Seki-kun, the Master of Killing Time, is one such show, albeit one that heavily slants towards the latter end of the scale. Master of Killing Time is a series of 7-minute episodes that follow our straight man Yokoi Rumi, who sits next to the titular character in class. In every episode, Seki-kun bludges a lesson through various games and projects, and try as Yokoi might to either ignore or discourage him from his distracting activities, she inevitably ends up utterly invested in whatever he has concocted up. It's incredibly mundane and about as slice as life as you can get, but the exaggerated reactions of the two characters make it feel grand in scope, and the whole thing keeps a really great energy about it. The whole thing plays out very much like a recurring skit on a sketch show, or hell, even a YouTube comedy series, except only, you know, good. The show has a really great pace to its comedy as well. Maybe a little slow to some, but I think that the steady escalation makes the gags all the more rewarding when they finally happen. Both of our characters are very likable, even if at the start it feels like the show should be called The Adventures of Autism-kun and Borderline-chan. Yokoi is a great straight man in the sense that she is a funny character in of herself. Though she presents herself as being completely sensible and sane, her imagination proves to be just as wild and intense as his is. She could switch from calm to fiery to sweet to enraged on a dime, and it would all fit her character. And the way that both of them reacted to things like shogi and toy robots with more seriousness in a G20 summit always managed to chortle my bortle. Chortle my bortle? See, this is why I shouldn't ad-lib. What I like is that his projects are elaborate, but not crazily so. They are all somewhat feasible, which makes them more impressive. It's more about his audacity of doing them all so openly, and the absurdity that no one other than Yokoi catches him. My favorite projects included making a note-passing postal service for the entire class, and simulating mountain climbing with a toy soldier on a student's back without his knowledge. The creators play around with certain variables from time to time, either by changing classroom, having an unwitting student be part of Seki's daring project, or in the case of a couple episodes, having the focal point be on one of Yokoi's friends who misinterprets her and Seki's interactions as being part of a spiraling Shakespearean romance. It's nothing exceptionally diverse, but they are nice and effective at keeping the formula refreshing. Unlike many a comedy anime, Seki-kun doesn't really have a focus on puns or wordplay, meaning that there is much less that can be lost through cultural translation. Even when there are culturally sensitive concepts, it either explains them well enough to not be exposition, or the joke simply speaks for itself. For example, you don't need to know the rules of shogi to know that this isn't how you play it. The only complaints I have are pretty inconsequential. Sometimes they'll explain the joke a little too much. Take this little gag.
細い。さっきの消しゴムすごく削られてる。また何か掘る気？この時間くらいおとなしくしてればいいのに。はあ！ ひょっとしてあれって印鑑のケース？
The joke happens and it's funny, but then Yokoi explains to us why it's funny. Her reaction is definitely important and needed to round out the joke, but I think that just a simple would have sufficed instead of a first line. We don't need to be told what happened because we just saw what happened. There are many gags that have long stretches without dialogue and they work just fine. In fact, these tended to be some of the moments I laughed longest and hardest at. The extra dialogue doesn't take away from the joke at all, as I still found it rather funny, and this is a problem I have with a lot of comedies, so I don't really take that much issue with it here. There are also a few dud episodes here and there that have disappointing games and whatnot, but these tend to be very few and far between. The first episode, however, is one of them, so I'd recommend watching to at least the second before deciding whether or not this series is worth your time. Presentation is neat and tidy. Like most of the series, the visuals are simple and efficient at conveying the comedy, though they do pull a couple of interesting stylistic flares here and there. Colors are light and soft to reflect the tone of the series, which switches to darker and vibrant whenever it represents the imaginary narrative of the games. It does use some 3D here and there, but it's used practically, just for things like the shogi pieces or the erasers, which would otherwise be a massive hassle to do, so I'm pretty much fine with it. And seeing how they pretty much stick to things that are very simple and angular in shape, you know what? It doesn't actually look half bad. Sometimes the blocking gets a little stiff, and whenever the characters are in profile, the designs makes the mouths look kind of silly, but these moments aren't often, and this isn't really a show that has a heavy focus on the technical. And I mean, really, most anime characters look retarded in profile. It sounds pretty decent as well. There's a very eclectic range of instruments here, and though this type of soundtrack is hardly remarkable for a comedy anime, these tracks are very charming and perfectly fit the tone. The tracks that play over the game's narratives are just bombastic and melodramatic enough that they would be cheesy if played in a non-comedy show, which makes them pretty much perfect for this. Yokoi is voiced by Hana Kawazawa, and I think she does a very good job here. Seki has no dialogue in the entire series, which I think is a great decision, as it makes him more interesting and enigmatic. And as for everyone else's voice action, who cares? Also, I really dig the opening and ending. Both are clever visually and conceptually, the OP in particular, with enjoyable songs and a tone that perfectly sets you up for the entire series. This is one of those few shows where I'd watch them every time on every episode, though it helps that they aren't 145 minutes long like in most anime. Though the premise may sound like every episode is just the same joke over and over again, the variety in the games and the narratives collectively created by their imaginations is enough that it never feels stale. There's an innocence and whimsy to the whole thing. It evokes feelings of all those times of boredom and the mundane, not just from high school, and the extensive level of productivity you can sometimes waste putting into a procrastination project. It's also every story about all those gronks from high school who did such foolhardy shit that you couldn't help but admire them a little. Well, except it's rated G, so maybe not the one about that Higgins kid who printed off several A3 pictures of a girl fingering herself in Technics and then tried to hide it under his desk. Fucking hell, Higgins. Tonari no Seki-kun is nice and sweet. Compared to the current slate of shows with their needlessly complex premises, disorienting pacing, confusing tone and character motivations, and just general lewdness, it's nice to see a show that is simple, knows what it wants to do, and does it well. It's clever, cute, and entertaining, and though it really doesn't have that much else to it, there was never a moment where the smile fell from my face while watching. Likeable characters, steady-paced comedy, and clean presentation help make this one of the most enjoyable shows of the year. This is one of the few anime that I hope actually gets a second season, and now that is saying some words that I wrote down. Its episode running time and lack of any moe blob ultra kawaii fanservice bullshit also makes it very approachable, so if you never really got the hubbub about high school slice of lives, you might still want to check this one out. Regardless, when it all comes down to it, it certainly is a great way to kill time.